Morning, everybody. It's good to be with you guys today. As John was talking about, we are in the process of moving to our new location. We're super excited. We only have today and one more Sunday in this location before we jump over to our new location. And so super excited. We have already been working really diligently, really hard to get things set up and ready for us. We have a couple more weeks. We think we're pretty much on glide path. It's going to be good. Super excited about that. Well, something you'll probably see in the mail if you live in certain areas of Camden, you're going to see a mailer come out that talks about our new move. We sent out 4,912 households. We sent mailers to all of those people. They'll be arriving this week for a lot of those. So, if we have 4,000 people show up, that'll be a good problem to have. You know what? We'll figure it out. We don't know what we'll do, but we'll figure it out. Super excited. But this is a big week. It's a big week not just because of what we're doing to prepare ourselves for the move. It's a big week because do you know what happens on Saturday? College football kickoff. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, before you say it, let me just go ahead and put this to bed. If you're a Kansas State fan or an Iowa State fan and you played yesterday, that's not the opening day. That's like a soft opening, so that doesn't count. The real opening is going to be this Saturday. Super excited about that. So I say that because if you're one of those guys that likes to text me or email or call me on the weekends, you got until about 11:30 on Saturday morning. After that, I'm not answering any calls or texts until the next day on Sunday morning, okay? Because I'm going to be tuned in watching college football. The other thing that's happening this week is, do you know what's happening on Tuesday? Even bigger, pumpkin spice latte comes back to Starbucks. That's right, yeah, And before you start mocking me, Proverbs says that scoffers reject wisdom. And if you want to be in that category, go right ahead, you're welcome. But for me and my household, I will be drinking Starbucks pumpkin spice latte this Tuesday. Super excited about that. So anyway, hey, let's get kicked off today. Hey, what if I asked you this question? What if I told you that I had a secret? And this is not just some ordinary secret. Like this is a secret, like this is a doozy. This is a big one. This is a secret that will change your life. This is one of those secrets that people have been chasing the contents of this secret from eternity on. They've been always looking out for this secret. And whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, this is a secret that, quite frankly, can change everything about your life. Do you think you'd be interested in that? Like, do you think that's something you'd want to know a little bit about? Of course you would, right? Because instinctively, we all know that the right information at the right time changes everything. The right information at the right time will change everything about your life. See, one of our first assignments when we were in the military was Hawaii. We actually, as a young lieutenant, our family was stationed in Hawaii, in Oahu. I know, suffering for Jesus, that's right. But it was awesome. We loved it. And one of the things that we loved the most about it is we had the opportunity when our friends and family came to visit us, we would take them over to Pearl Harbor. Pearl Harbor has this great monument. It's got a good museum, a little tour that you can take. You can go out to the USS Arizona. You can see the ship that sunk in the water there. But something you may not know about the attack on Pearl Harbor is in the lead up to the weeks and days before Pearl Harbor, on at least 3 separate occasions, information was made available that an imminent attack was about to occur. And in every single one of those occasions, that information was ignored. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. In the weeks, like in the late November time frame, all of the Japanese naval vessels went radio silent. They just went completely radio silent. And that's huge, but what the leadership did, they said, oh, well, maybe it's just a training exercise. Maybe they're just having some issues with their radios, so they just kind of ignored it. And then about 2 days before, there was this commercial fisherman. He was out just outside the harbor at Pearl Harbor, and he was fishing at like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And he's sitting there fishing, and he looks up, and a periscope shoots up out of the water. That's strange, right? So he goes that day to the officials and he says, hey, he tells them what he saw. He saw this periscope just kind of looking around outside of Pearl Harbor. Well, the officials are like, well, maybe it was debris in the water. Man, it was early. Maybe he just didn't see what he thought he saw. So what did they do? They ignored it. And then the morning of the attack, there were 2 new sailors that had just got assigned to Pearl Harbor. And they were working in the intel branch. And they were experimenting with this new technology for the time. It was called radar. And they were looking at the radar system, and they saw a fleet of 183 planes coming from the north, getting ready to head towards the North Shore. Except all of the old-timers, they didn't trust this technology, so they looked at it and they're like, oh, maybe it's just some of the American bombers that were scheduled to come back later in the day. Maybe they're just early and they're going to land early. So what do? They ignored it. See, the right information at the right time only matters if you apply it. The right information at the right time only matters if you take action on it. And the results of that event were devastating. The results of the attack on Pearl Harbor were devastating. 2,403 Americans lost their lives that day. 900 sailors and Marines were permanently entombed in the USS Arizona to this day. All because the right information at the right time wasn't actioned on. And so you guys remember, we've been walking through, for the last 2 months, we've been walking through the book of Philippians. And you remember how we started this journey in Philippians, right? It was Paul on his second missionary journey. He shows up in this town of Philippi, and immediately he runs into 3 different people that he's going to convert to the faith, right? First one was a lady named Lydia. And by all accounts, Lydia was a very successful business lady. She had like her own clothing line. She was like a CEO, super successful. But she meets Paul, and Paul shares the gospel with her and converts her to the faith. And then the next person, a few days later, he runs into this demon-possessed little girl who's a slave girl. And he cast out the demon out of this girl. And by all accounts, we find out that she also converted to Christianity as well. And then, a little later, Paul gets thrown in prison in Philippi because some people didn't like his actions or what he was doing. So he starts sharing the gospel with a Roman jailer. And he shares the faith with this guy, and this guy comes to faith. And these 3 individuals are some of the founding members of the early church in Philippi. This is the church that Paul planted here. And so 10 years goes by. He leaves. He goes on to other places. 10 years goes by, and Paul finds himself in a Roman jail cell. And he sits down, and he decides to write this letter to the church in Philippi. And when he writes this church to the letter in Philippi, he's like, man, I just want you to know that I love you, that I'm proud of you, that I thank you for being gospel partners with me, that I had this deep, abiding love for you, and I just wanted to say thank you for that. But don't forget, he wants to remind them, he says, remember, you got to live a life worthy of the gospel. Live a life worthy of the gospel. And I love that Paul anticipates this because you're like, how? How, Paul? How do I live a life worthy of the gospel? Well, he tells us. He gets into chapter 2 of the letter, and he's like, you got to be humble. You got to practice humility. You got to think of others more highly than you do of yourself. And he says, oh, by the way, yeah, you need to have the same mindset of Jesus. You got to have the same mind. You got to think like him. You got to have the same attitude as Jesus. Because remember, Jesus, he came down and he added humanity to his nature. But Jesus humbled himself, and he took on the form of a servant. And he was obedient to the will of his Father all the way to the cross. So he's saying, hey, you got to do that. You got to have that mindset. And he says, oh, yeah, you remember my boys, Timothy and Epaphroditus? Yeah, they're great examples right now of what it means to live a humble servant lifestyle. So look at them, check them out at what they're doing, because they will give you a good example of how to live your life. And then we get ourselves into chapter 3. And in chapter 3, Paul gives us this warning. He says, look, in your effort to live a life worthy of the gospel, here's what you got to do. It ain't about your works. It ain't about anything that you've done or anything you've accomplished. It's not about your resume. He says, yes, you were saved for good works, but you are not saved by good works. He says your resume doesn't mean anything. He said, you want to compare resumes? Look at my resume. If anybody could earn their way into heaven, it's me. Look at all the things that I've done. But I consider my resume complete rubbish. That's the word the English translations use. Remember, the Greek is skupalon. It literally means it's slang for animal dung. I'll let you insert your own thing there. But that's what he's telling them. He's like, all these things that I thought gave me, influence and authority, it means nothing when it comes to having a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so Paul says, hey, if you're not getting it, man, just imitate me. Like your righteousness does not come from yourself, it comes from God. And if you're not understanding that, just imitate what I do. He said, because look, I haven't arrived yet. I'm not there yet. He said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I used to be. But I'm going to continue to press on. I'm going to continue to push forward to the prize that is awaiting me. And then he says, hey, here's how you do this. Because they're asking the question. They're like, well, how do you press on, Paul? He says, well, here's what you got to do. He says, first thing you got to do is you got to resolve the conflict in the church. We talked about this last week. He says you got to resolve any of the tension and conflict, because conflict within the church is a terrible testimony to Jesus Christ. He says, and if you have conflict with someone else in the church, man, that's going to rob you of joy, it's going to rob you of peace, and it's going to rob you of the contentment that I want for you. So you got to resolve the conflict. You got to be a peacemaker. As much as it relies on you, as much as it is up to you, you need to make peace with all the people that you have conflict with. And then he says, oh yeah, I know you got some anxiety building up in you. So you got to deal with that too. Because you can't let that anxiety just sit there, because it's going to gnaw at you, it's going to eat you from the inside out. And what he says you got to do is you got to take that anxiety and you got to churn it. You got to turn it towards God. I want you to take that anxiety, I want you to reorient it, point it Godward, and I want you to release it to Him. And you do that through prayer, of supplication, and thanksgiving. And we talked about that last week. He says you got to pray and you got to lay it at God's feet and leave it there. And he says when you do this, when you do these things, you're going to have a peace about you. It's a peace that is not based on your circumstances. It's a peace that's going to surpass or transcend all understanding. And when you get that, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to dwell on these things. There's some good things in this world that I want you to dwell on. I want you to dwell on truth, things that are pure, things that are excellent, things that are right, things that are just. And he says, I want you to fixate your mind on these things. And that takes us all the way through the book of Philippians to where we are today. And the reason I share that is because over 9 weeks, when you do a sermon series like this where you're walking through a book, it's easy to see it as a disjointed book because you're looking at it sermon after sermon after sermon, week after week after week. But what I want you to understand is what Paul is actually trying to accomplish with this letter. And that's the flow of this letter of how we get to where we are. Now, where we are today, Paul's going to end the letter by sharing a secret. We're in the last message today, and he has got a secret for us. He's going to reveal it today, and this secret is a game changer. The secret that he has will change the trajectory of our lives if we apply what he is teaching us. Because the right information at the right time changes everything if you apply it to your life. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're going to be in Philippians chapter 4, beginning in verse 10 today. It says this, it says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly. There's our word, rejoiced. 14 times in this letter he has used that word, rejoiced, or to have joy. It's a recurring thing that we see. It says, I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at length you have revived your concern for me. You were indeed concerned for me, but you had no opportunity. That word concern, when he says revived your concern, that's the same word that he uses in chapter 1 when Paul says, it is right for me to feel this way about you, church. In other words, Paul has this deep, deep, abiding love for the church in Philippi. And what he is saying in this moment is like, not only do I have this deep, abiding love for you, I know that you have a deep, abiding love for me too. And we recognize that we have this deep, abiding love for each other. And what he's saying is like, look, early on, man, you supported the ministry. You supported everything I was doing. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for doing that. But there was a period of time where you weren't in a position to do that, and I recognize that, and that's okay. But now you have another opportunity to continue to support me in the ministry that we're doing. And see, what Paul is talking about is the church in Philippi, while he was in the Roman jail cell, they sent a care package to him. Epaphroditus brought this care package to Paul, because remember, he's in a Roman jail cell, and in Roman jail cells, it's not like the prisons today. You don't have all the comforts that you have. You don't have cable TV and 3 square meals a day. Anything that you get in these jail cells is all by just the generosity of the people around you that know you. And so they took a care package to Paul to say, hey, we love you, here's what we have for you. And what Paul is doing is he's not just thanking them for their feelings. He's not just thanking them for the deep abiding love that they have for him. What he's thanking them also for is for the action that accompanies that feeling. See, love is one of those, it's called a relationally determinative term. What it means is that you can love someone, but if it goes unexpressed, it's going to come across as anything but love. So love has to have an expression accompanied with it. Like I can sit here and tell you all day long, man, I love you. I do. I love you so much. But if my actions don't line up with that, if the way I treat you, the way I engage with you doesn't line up with that, you're not going to feel loved. And what Paul is saying is like, look, yeah, I get it. You love me, but thank you for the actions that accompany that. Because love without actions is useless. Intentions without words are meaningless. They're just words. So he keeps going. Verse 11, he says, not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. And so contentment, right there is our word. Contentment is not our secret, but it's our goal, right? We all strive to be content in this world. That's what we all want. We want to get to a place in our life where we can just be content. And what Paul is saying is that contentment is learned. Contentment must be learned because contentment, it's not a natural response. It's not a natural thing that just comes to us. It's not something that we're necessarily born with. Have you ever met a content baby? Like, he may be content for a little while, right up until he starts crying. And you know that every time a baby cries, it's one of three things. He's either hungry, he's tired, or he's made a mess that you need to clean up. And he will be content when you clean that mess up or when you take care of that need. But it's a circumstantial contentment. It's only temporary. It's only based on the situation that's around him. And he'll be content as long as you are meeting his need. But the second you don't, the contentment goes away. See, contentment also, it's not intuitive. It doesn't just come to us naturally. It's not something we just kind of figure out on our own. It has to be shared. It has to be kind of taught. And what Paul is saying, it has taken me a lifetime of following Jesus to get to a point of contentment, to understand what true contentment is. See, the word contentment, there are a lot of words in the Bible that our society has changed the meaning of. They've hijacked these words, things like love and truth. And what happens is society and our culture kind of twist the meaning of those to fit whatever situation they're in right now. But when you look at a biblical version of what these words mean, it means something completely different. And contentment is one of those words. See, contentment means something different to us now than it does in the Bible. Contentment is not about good vibes and chilling out. That's not what contentment is. Contentment is not sitting on a beach somewhere with your feet in the ocean with a margarita in your hand listening to Jimmy Buffett in the background. That's not contentment. See, because if you're in that situation, all it takes is one good rain to come through and your contentment is gone. It's temporary. Contentment is also not a do-nothing feeling. It's not some kind of passive, compromising approach to life. It's not this false sense of satisfaction that we sometimes try to lull ourselves into. Because look, church, I'm going to be honest with you. There's some things that we as a church should not be satisfied with at all. As long as there are lost people walking around this world, we've got some work to do. As long as there are marriages that are failing and falling apart, we've got work to do. As long as there are people who are living in poverty and don't have a meal and don't know where their next meal is coming from, we've got some work to do. As long as there are people that need to be rescued in the name of Jesus, we got some work to do. So what Paul is talking about here is not just sitting back and just letting life come to you and taking a passive approach to life. See, Jesus says, from the days of John the Baptist until today, the kingdom of heaven is under this violent attack by forcible men who are trying to take over it. And so we have to stand ready to defend that. Contentment is not about just hanging back and just letting life happen. So if you want a good working definition of what biblical contentment is, here's one that you can run with. Biblical contentment is the state of transcendent peace that comes only from God. It's a state of transcendent peace. It means it surpasses, it transcends all your circumstances, all the things that are happening in your life. It is not predicated on your circumstances. It's not based on your circumstances. It transcends all of that. And it comes only from God. That's why in the next verse, in verse 12, Paul's going to say this. He says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Other translations will put that last line like this. They'll say, I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. And look, if anybody understands the highs and lows of life, man, it's Paul. Like if you look at his ministry that he did go to the book of Acts, starting in about chapter 9, where you see his conversion on the road to Damascus, and follow it all the way to the end to like chapter 28, his entire ministry, his entire life was marked by these extreme highs and extreme lows. He had this pattern of highs and lows, highs and lows. One of my favorite books or verses that comes out of Acts 9, you remember, so he has this encounter with Jesus on the road to Damascus. And then he gets led into Damascus because he's been blinded by Jesus, by this experience. And God goes to Ananias, who's one of the brothers of the faith. And he tells Ananias, I need you to go and take care of Paul. And Ananias is like, you sure? Because that's Paul. I've heard of his reputation. No. He says, I need you to go and inform him. He needs to know how much he's going to suffer for my name. So from the very beginning, he was marked for some extreme lows in his life. He was going to have to grind. He was going to have to do some hard work for the name of Jesus. But this is just a trend that we see with Paul all throughout his ministry. Even in Philippi, when he goes to establish the church in Philippi, he has these extreme highs and extreme lows. Remember, the first person he met with was Lydia. Super rich woman, has this mansion, servants. She's like, hey, Paul, how about you and your crew just come and hang out at my house while you're here in Philippi while we're getting this thing going? You can use my house for the church. Oh, by the way, you guys just go take the east wing of the house. I'll live in the west wing. I got my servants here. He's dining on like ribeye steaks and just chilling out every night. But Paul says, I can be content in abundance. But then just weeks later, he finds himself in jail in Philippi. And he says, oh, by the way, yeah, I can be content while I'm in jail too. How awesome would it be to have that kind of contentment in your life, that no matter what circumstances come at you, you can be content? And look, when I tell you Paul's lows were low, like, trust me, we do not experience anything like what Paul went through. If you go to 2 Corinthians chapter 11, he kind of catalogs some of the things that he went through and he suffered through for Christ. It says that 5 times he received 39 lashes. 39 lashes, that means he was scourged. That's the same punishment that Jesus suffered before he was sent to the cross. 5 times he had that happen to him. 3 times he says he was beaten with rods. 3 times he was shipwrecked. He was stoned in Lystra. He was arrested numerous times over and over. Anybody see the movie Happy Gilmore? Remember that movie? Yeah, I was watching it a couple of weeks ago. It was awesome. Do you remember the scene? So Shooter McGavin is like his arch nemesis, and he hires this dude named Donald. And he pays Donald to simply follow Happy around while he's playing golf, and all he's supposed to do is just poke fun of him, mock him, kind of ridicule, like needle him a little bit, and to get up under his skin. Well, there was actually a group of people that did this to Paul. You see him going from town to town, church to church, around like Athens in that area. There was a group of people that literally every time he would stand up to share the gospel or to preach, all they did was sit there and poke at him and do that. So he was mocked, he was persecuted in this way. It says he was run out of town. He was always under threat of robbers trying to steal from him, thugs beating him up. He suffered hunger and thirst. He had environmental concerns. He was exposed to the heat and to the elements and to the cold. But in all of this, Paul maintained contentment. He was content in all of this. Can you imagine that kind of contentment in your life? That no matter what your circumstances are, no matter how low it gets, you'll still be content. You'll still have the peace that transcends all understanding. And he also learned from his highs. He also learned from the times where he had abundance as well. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, yeah, what do you mean he had contentment in abundance? Of course, you give me a bunch of stuff and I'll be content too. Have you ever known someone that had everything in the world but yet had no contentment? You ever know that person who's got everything they've ever wanted but they never have peace in their life? It's because they're seeking peace in the wrong thing. See, I don't know if you realize this, but our world is constantly trying to sell us on peace and contentment. You realize this, right? Like, it's constantly trying to sell us on peace and contentment. And that's why every couple of years when it doesn't work, they have to come out with a newer, upgraded, better version of the thing that the world's trying to sell you on, because it never worked to start with. And so what you have to do is you have to kind of go with and chase after that newer, upgraded version. And we're all in. We do this all the time. We're all susceptible to this. We're all in. We all buy into what the world's trying to sell us. You know what we call that? We call that the carousel of stupidity. Not because things are stupid, but because we're stupid. And let me explain how the carousel works. This is how it works. The world will convince you, they'll give you this idea that this thing is going to bring peace, contentment, and joy to your life. And so what do? You hop on the carousel and you start chasing that thing. Round and round and round you go until you finally catch it. Maybe it's that new house. Maybe it's that new upgraded truck. Maybe it's the new phone, whatever your thing is. But you start chasing it. And then finally you catch it. You finally get that thing you've been trying for so long. And what happens? It doesn't bring you the peace and the contentment and the joy that you thought it would. And so what do? You look over here and now there's a newer version. Okay, there's a newer house. It's got an extra bedroom and an extra half bath. Or you got that truck. I know I got the 2500 series, but that 3500 series with the diesel and the dualies, man, I need that, definitely. Or I know I got like the iPhone 15, but I really need that iPhone 30 because it shoots out lasers and has holograms, and I need that in my life. So what do? We just hop back on that carousel and we take another lap around. We all find ourselves doing this. But can you imagine having the kind of contentment that regardless of your highs, regardless of your lows, you're just content. You have peace. See, that's what Christ wants for you. That's what Jesus wants for all of us. He wants us to have that type of contentment in our lives. And for some of us, you're like, when you have that moment where you have everything in your life, you understand we are all just one phone call away from all of that crashing down on us. You understand? I don't care how good your life is going right now, how strong you think you are. There's not a single person in this room that if you got one text or one phone call that would bring you to your knees right now. It would crush you. It would make your heart feel like it's falling out of your chest. Your whole world will feel like it's crumbling down around you. But how awesome would it be to have that peace and contentment that regardless of your circumstances, you can continue to push on. Okay, so what's the secret, Paul? What's the secret to contentment? I mean, you've done a pretty good job of setting this up. What's the secret to contentment that you're talking about? Well, he tells us in verse 13. Verse 13 says, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can do all things through him, through Christ, who strengthens me. This is probably one of the most well-known, misused, misunderstood, taken out of context verses in all of the world. It is in all of the Bible. There are banners at football games that will have this on it. You'll see it on coffee mugs. You'll see it on T-shirts. People love this verse for some reason, but it's the most taken out of context verse ever. Even our buddy, old Tim Tebow, used to paint it under his eyes when he would go to football games. And in this picture, I don't know, I can't confirm this, but I'm pretty sure this was the SEC championship of 2009 when they lost to Alabama, Roll Tide. Pretty sure. But the reality is, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I remember when I was much younger, when I was like in high school, I think I was like a freshman, I read this verse and I'm like, yes, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I've always wanted to dunk a basketball, despite the fact that I am 5'9.5" with my boots on my best day. I got this. I can do this, right? So I go to the gym and I get my basketball and I get it. I'm like, I got this. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And I go running. Man, I didn't even touch the nets. Like I've got the vertical leap of like 6 inches. Seriously, I could not do it. And so I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense because I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, right? Except here's the thing. When he says, I can do all things, the all things he's talking about here are abundance or need. It's plenty or hungry. It's being brought low or abounding. It's not about winning the big championship game. It's not about chasing your dreams. It's not about following your passion or pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. It's not about accomplishing everything you want. This is not a promise from Jesus that you're going to have some type of superpower that's going to make you immune or invincible to the problems of the world. That's not what this verse is about. This verse is about regardless of your circumstances, you can make it through with contentment regardless, no matter what the world throws at you. And then it says, through him who strengthens me, through Christ who strengthens me. See, the secret to contentment isn't, I got this. That's not the secret. The secret is, I ain't got this. The secret is, Jesus, I need you to do for me what I cannot do for myself. That's what he's saying, that no matter what the world throws at me, I can take it. Come what may, I can deal with it because I have this transcendent peace. And this transcendent peace does not come from me. It comes from the strength of Jesus. It is not a strength that is found inside of myself. It comes from Jesus. He's the one that strengthens me. It's His strength. And what Paul is saying is that Christ is your contentment. That's what Christ wants for all of us. That we will rest in His power. That we will rest in His strength. And see, for Paul, in a life that was constantly marked by these extreme highs and lows, Paul has learned contentment. Paul has learned transcendent peace. Why? Because he doesn't rely on his own strength. He relies on the strength and the power of Jesus Christ. He leans on Him and into His strength for every single thing. And that's why he can have this peace. But don't forget, guys, there's an enemy out there. We've talked about this. There's an enemy out there, and the enemy has one goal. One goal, and that's all. John 10:10, he tells us the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. That's all he wants to do. Everything good in this world comes from God. He is the counterpoint to that, and he is going to try to kill, steal, and destroy everything good that God has put in your life. And so he is going to rail against your contentment. He is going to rail against your peace. He's going to rail against your joy in your life. And you just got to understand that he's coming after you. And I love that in this letter, if we look back at it, there are multiple times Paul talks about these, what I'm going to call contentment robbers. There are things that Satan's going to do to try to trip you up that you need to be aware of to take away your contentment. The first one is that you'll never experience the peace of God until you have peace with God. You'll never have the peace of God until you have peace with God. In other words, if you want to experience the peace of God, you've got to say yes to Jesus. He's done all the work. You don't have to do anything. All you got to do is say yes to Him. And here's the thing. If you have not said yes to Jesus, the best this world can offer you, the best you could ever hope for is circumstantial happiness. That's all. That's it. It's going to come and go based on what's happening in your life, but you will never have true contentment, true peace in your life. Here's another contentment robber. When you lack gospel confidence, when you begin to think that somehow salvation is based on Jesus plus anything else. Yeah, Jesus is awesome. This finished work of Jesus on the cross is great, but I probably need to do a little extra work on my own in order to make sure I earn it. But you understand, the second you start thinking you can earn salvation, it's no longer salvation. It's no longer grace, because grace is the unmerited, undeserved merit from God. And what will happen is, if you start thinking that somehow your religious resume matters and you've got to chase after and you've got to keep up and you've got to do some things, you are going to wear yourself out trying to keep up. It doesn't work, because there's no amount of good you can do to earn your salvation. It is a free gift from God. That's what the gospel is all about. Another robber is when you start thinking that this world is your home. For Christians, Paul tells us that our citizenship is in heaven. That's where our permanent home is. This home on earth is a temporary home. But the second we start trying to treat this home, this temporary residence that we're in, as our permanent forever home, we're going to be robbed of contentment. You will never, ever experience the peace that he's talking about if you continue to treat this place as your permanent residence. Because our permanent residence is not here, it's in heaven with Him. And then anxiety. Anxiety will be one of the biggest robbers of your contentment, which is exactly why last week we talked about when you have anxiety, you've got to turn it over to God. You've got to take it, you've got to orient it towards God, and you've got to release it and leave it at His feet. And you do that through prayer, through prayers of supplication and prayers of thanksgiving. And every single day that you wake up, you've got to quit taking it back, and you've got to continue to leave it at His feet. You've got to leave it with Jesus every single day. And so what Paul's going to do for the rest of this letter, he's going to talk about this topic of generosity. He's going to hit us on generosity, because see, the opposite of generosity is greed. And greed is actually one of the biggest killers, one of the biggest robbers of our contentment. But here's the thing about greed. The reality is we don't typically think of ourselves as greedy. We don't. Like when I first said greed, my guess is I know exactly where your brains went. You immediately thought of at least two people that I wish they could hear this message. Because that person over there, oh yeah, that person's greedy. But not me. I'm not greedy. Do you know why we do that? Because it's based on a feeling. We don't feel greedy. You know what I'm saying? Like when those compassionate commercials come on TV and you get that little tug on the heartstrings, or like, you're downtown and you see that homeless family and you're like, man, someone really should do something for them. It just tugs on my heartstring. You're like, man, I just feel generous because look, it's playing with my heart. I feel generous. Did you do anything about it? Oh, no, I didn't do anything about it, but I felt something in my heart. So I'm generous, right? But that's not how it works. See, nobody feels greedy. Nobody feels rich. See, there's 3 postures that we can take towards money in this world. Just 3 postures. First posture is this: what's mine is mine. If that's your idea of your money, that's selfish. We call that selfish. And if you get offended by that, if you're naturally defensive when you hear that, that's the greed kicking in. What's mine is selfish. The other posture is this: what's yours is mine. We call that stealing. What's yours is mine is stealing. Unless it's the government, we call it socialism. Okay? Yeah. I thought you liked that. But then there's the biblical approach to money. We have a biblical approach to how we handle our money, and it's what's mine is God's. We call that stewardship. And what we are called to do is to be good stewards of the resources that God has given us. Some He has given a lot, some He has portioned a small amount. But we are to take whatever He has given us and use that for the furtherment of His kingdom, to grow His kingdom here on earth. And that's what we're called to do. And so Paul says it here. Let's pick it up in verse 14. He says, "Yet it was kind of you to share my trouble. And you Philippians yourselves know that in the beginning of the gospel, when I left Macedonia, no church entered into partnership with me in giving and receiving, except you only. Even in Thessalonica, you sent help for my needs once again." In other words, he's saying, thank you for being such a generous church. Thank you for contributing to the ministry that we're doing. You have funded this ministry when nobody else would. You have fueled what God is doing through our ministry. So thank you. Way to go. Proud of you. Awesome. Thank you. But he keeps going in verse 17. He says, "Not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit." Paul's saying, it's not about the money. It's not. He's saying, look, I've learned to be content in all circumstances. I've learned to be content in abundance, and I've learned to be content in need. And I'm good. It's not about the money. What he says is, but I want this for you. I want you to have a generous heart. He says, I want you to have a generous spirit. And the reason is because when you are generous towards God, he's saying that there's a fruit that increases to your credit. In other words, there's a blessing that gets turned back to you because of that. And Paul wants that blessing for each of us. Paul wants it because the reality is when we are a generous people, it's a reflection of our heart. It's a reflection of a heart that is properly oriented towards God. See, it doesn't matter how you reorient your heart. It doesn't matter how you restructure or reorient anything in your life. If Jesus isn't first and foremost in everything you do, then everything that falls behind will be out of order. So we have to make sure that we have a generous heart. And then Jesus has the audacity to say this. He says, wherever your treasure is, your heart will be right there with it. And so what Paul is saying is like, look, my goal for you is to be generous. I want you to be a generous people because it's a reflection of your heart, and your heart's going to follow behind you. So the question we have to ask ourselves this morning is, are we generous to God? Are we using the resources that God has given us as stewards for His kingdom? Are we using those things to advance His kingdom? Paul keeps going in verse 18. He says, I have received full payment and more. I am well supplied, having received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. That's what we talked about earlier. Paul's saying, again, it's not about the money. It's not. He's saying it's about what God is going to do when you treasure Christ above all other things. When you have a generous heart, you treasure Christ above all other things. There's a contentment in that. He says there's a supernatural thing that God is going to do in your life when you have a generous heart that way. But look how he describes it. I love how he describes it. He says, a fragrant offering, a sacrifice acceptable and pleasing to God. Verse 19, he says, and my God will supply every need, not want, every need of yours according to His riches in glory in Christ Jesus. A word that you'll hear in churches a lot is this word tithing or tithe. It literally translates into the word 10, or that's where we get the idea of giving 10% of everything. But it's not just about a 10% of giving. It actually means your first and best. It means that you give your first and best to God in everything that you do. Now, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but the reality is every single one of us tithes to something. We do. You're going to give your first and best to something. It may be your job, it may be, a hobby, it may be, whatever. But what he's saying is you got to make sure you're giving your first and best to God. So the question is, where are you placing your first and best? We have to wrestle with that question. What are we doing with the first and best we have? Are we giving it to God? And he goes on in verse 20, he says, to our God and Father be the glory forever and ever. Amen. He's still saying, man, it's not about me. It's about God. It's not about what I'm going through. It's not about what I'm experiencing. It's not about the work I'm doing. It's all about God. And I love that Paul's a preacher because he says amen and he's still got like 3 verses left. He says this, verse 21, he says, greet every saint in Christ Jesus. The brothers who are with me greet you. All the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household. And you want to talk about contentment? And Paul's like, man, don't feel bad for me. I've always wanted to go to Rome. I just thought it would look a little different. I didn't think I would be in jail, but I always wanted to go to Rome. He said, oh, no, by the way, while I'm here, oh, yeah, I've still been sharing the gospel. I hadn't stopped. I hadn't backed off that at all. Oh, by the way, all of these households of Caesar, I've been converting them for Jesus as well. So Paul's like, don't feel bad for me. I don't know if you've ever thought about this, and this might be just a little bit of speculation on my part. 300 years after Paul writes this, over 50% of the Roman Empire has been converted to Christianity. Over half of the Roman Empire is converted to Christianity within just 3 centuries of Paul writing this letter. Do you think maybe it had a little something to do with all of the members of Caesar's household that had all of the influence and all of the authority from the inside out, the people that he had converted early on that began to spread the gospel from the inside out? Do you think maybe the work that he did there had a little bit of an influence on the spreading of the gospel? He says, because I'm content in any and every situation. Then Paul wraps it up this way. He says, the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. See, Paul had a secret. And the secret was that true contentment is found in Christ Jesus. That's where our contentment comes from. Do you want peace for your life? Do you want a peace that surpasses all understanding? Do you want joy? Do you want a joy that can't be taken away from you? Do you want contentment? Like true contentment that says, regardless of the circumstances, come what may, let this world throw what it wants to at me, I will stay content in any and everything. It's yours. It's yours there for the taking. That's what Jesus wants for you. You understand that? Like, that's what he wants for you. All you have to do is say yes to him. He's done all the work. All you got to do is say yes. You just have to step into that relationship with him, and you can experience that. Jesus is literally offering it to you. Will you say yes to him? And I love how he says it in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11, Jesus says this. He says, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. I love that. Aren't you tired of being heavy laden and laboring? He will give you rest. He goes on, he says, take my yoke upon you, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. And I love this. He says, and you will find rest for your souls. See, Paul calls it contentment. Jesus calls it rest for your souls. You can have rest. You can have a peace for your soul. You can have contentment in your soul. All you got to do is say yes to Jesus. All you got to do is turn that over to him. Stop resting on your own strength. Stop trying to turn it inward and do it yourself. Rest on his strength. That's what he's there for. He is there and he wants to just help you, give you that peace, give you that contentment that only he can give you. We just have to say yes to him. So let me pray for us.